Josh Conerly, offensive tackle out of Oregon, is rising up the draft boards, which is one of my least favorite myths about draft season, because realistically what that means is that Josh Conerly Jr. is rising up on some mock draft boards because people are starting to get more of a clue for what the teams actually like. I think a lot of teams have probably been high on Josh Conerly Jr. for a while now. It's just that he's a guy that improved a lot as the season went along this last year. And I think it took a little while for some people to kind of maybe reset or reassess their expectations for him, because he got stronger as the year went along. He looked like he was stronger, but one of the knocks against him is his strength. I remember seeing in scouting reports before the combine, well, he might not be that athletic. And I'm watching him on film and I'm like, this guy's pretty damn athletic. And lo and behold, he tested really well at the combine. So this from Nate Tice, son of former NFL coach Mike Tice, who does a Football 301 podcast. I'm going to play a clip. This is Nate Tice after he had some really positive things to say, and after his father had some really positive things to say about Josh Conerly Jr. This is Nate Tice on a couple of calls he received.
After we did that pod, 2 teams reached out to me and told me to shut up. Hey, enough with the Conerly talk. Don't post that clip anymore.
Yeah. And this is how I am with Josh Conerly. When you watch him, he moves really fluidly. There are a lot of things about him that remind you of the better aspects of Laremy Tunsil. There are a lot of things that he does that you just can't coach. And pass protection, uses his hands well. There's times where he struggles to anchor, and we'll show a few of those later on. His body positioning could be improved. He leans a little bit. He's not going to be able to get away with that as a smaller guy in the NFL, or not of ideal size. But I like a lot about him. And when we started to get into some of the run games, him picking up games at times, by the way, in the pass game is really good. Like he shows intelligence. He mirrors really well. All of these things that, yeah, he needs to grow into his strength. When you watch him in the run game, he gets after it on some of these down blocks. He shows a violence. He gets his hips around. He was a running back his first couple years in high school, then moved to offensive line. There's a screen coming up here that I got really excited about, because as we know, one of the things that Laremy Tunsil struggles with is actually hitting human beings in space on screens. He shows no appetite for it whatsoever. Conerly, when he's pulling, like, knows where to go, uses his hips and hands really well, keeps his legs churning through the play, tries to deliver a wallop, but he doesn't have that much of a wallop to him. I think him moving and playing in the Big Ten this year was good for him, because he got to get some good film on. Here it is. Boom. Then gets out, gets a body on a body. Could have found a free somebody there. But I think what I keep seeing from people, and Charles McDonald, Forverts on that Football 301 podcast, said the same thing that I was thinking as I was watching this, because I try to defer to the people that watch all the film and have a big background in this, is that I'm waiting for boxes that I can't check. And realistically, there really aren't a whole lot of them, other than that he's a guy that it does need to develop some more strength, and that's not always a given or a certain that he's going to, but he reportedly has a really good work ethic. He improved the entire time that he was a starter for 2 years at Oregon. Here's Josh Conerly, so you don't think I'm bagging on him unnecessarily. This is Josh Conerly on the feedback he's gotten from NFL teams on what he needs to improve on.
A lot of improvements that I've been told is like to make improvements in the run game and anchoring bull rushes as well. So.
Yeah. And that holds up, and I'll show you a few of those. Here's who his influences are. And again, don't be alarmed or dismayed by the name he brings up here, because I think it's actually a pretty good thing to aspire to, at least as a pass protector.
When I first got into it, I feel like I watched Tyron Smith a lot, but I've kind of went a little bit more newer school with Laremy Tunsil and Rashawn Slater. Those are guys.
Yeah. So with Laremy Tunsil, the run part is the part where Laremy, as we know in Houston, that was the incomplete picture that a lot of the people that like to bow down to the Pro Football Focus pass protection grade like to ignore, is that he was so and sometimes a reluctant run blocker. That was the scouting report on Laremy Tunsil coming out of college. I think with Conerly, I don't think there's any reluctance to it whatsoever. I think it's a matter of him learning to be a better run blocker, which he did all throughout college. And in the second half of the season, he just got better and better at it. And then secondly, working on that strength and that ability. If you look at his spider chart, which these are fun, if you've never seen a spider chart before, kind of shows where you stack up physically compared to other offensive line prospects. Athletically, remember before the combine, people said, well, I don't know how good an athlete he is. I'm watching film. I'm like, he looks like a pretty damn good athlete. Vertical 40-yard dash, 10-yard split, hand size, all very good. It's just on the physical side, he's just not your ideal prototype offensive tackle. And that's where I start to wonder, all right, if the Texans want to be more of a well-rounded offense where they have a gap scheme and a power scheme where they can just bulldoze people, they might be looking for some more of that ideal size. But athletically, I think he's just absolutely fine. If you watch some of the run plays, the biggest ones were really versus Penn State, and he's a left offensive tackle here, obviously. I don't think I have him highlighted yet. Left offensive tackle there. This is versus Abdul Carter. There were a couple times where Abdul Carter got him on skates, but kind of like Laremy Tunsil, he has an ability to recover, and he doesn't just get demolished and destroyed. Versus Ohio State, that big number 44 got him once. But, you know, he does recover. He regroups. There's potential there. And I just, by way of just showing you that he actually had a pretty good game versus Abdul Carter, had some nice reps for him, just ran him around the hoop there, readjusts on an inside move there and washes him down the line. Big old number 44 there. Got the better of him that time. Sometimes he's a little stiff opening his hips up and really getting out, but he will attack and drive versus those same guys. His tape versus Ohio State and Penn State was very impressive. A little bit more of a power giving up there. So that's the part where you start wondering, all right, it's one thing versus Abdul Carter or 44 for Ohio State is I think about 260 or so when you start facing some of those 280-pound guys, but then picking up the game here, does a lot of really good things. So this is where the crux is. And to address one comment, Tyler Booker is way stronger and a better pass protector, but Conerly is way more athletic and has a better work ethic. I don't know about the work ethic part. I mean, people are pretty gushing about Tyler Booker. As far as, I mean, Booker is a guard and nothing else. I've seen some people say Josh Conerly maybe could move down inside the guard. You know, athletically, when you look at the spider charts, one of the guys that he actually compares pretty evenly with is Steve Hutchinson, the Hall of Fame guard. But I don't think he's a guard. I think he is a tackle. I think he's an athlete. I don't want to call him a finesse player, but I think his strengths are on the athletic side of things. He does show a scrappiness and a willingness to get after it. I think there's an eagerness to block and be a run blocker that's above and beyond what Laremy Tunsil displayed in college. But it's a little bit of apples to oranges. I do feel that if I had to choose, and this is where I've been building up to. I really want an interior offensive lineman. I'm not over the moon about any of these guards. There's a lot of things I really like about Tyler Booker. There's a lot of things I really like about Gray Zabal. There's a lot of things I like about Jackson, Donovan Jackson. I'm forgetting a guard here or there. I like a lot of those guys. I think the upside of Conerly is a lot higher than any of those guys. And I think other NFL teams are looking at that way, though, too. I watch him, and I really have a hard time. We heard Mike Tice on my earlier episode talking about that Conerly's his favorite offensive lineman in this draft. I think a lot of coaches, when they watch Josh Conerly, and coaches are kind of late to the party after scouts have been watching guys for 2 years and everything, a lot of coaches are really going to like Josh Conerly. If the Texans choose Josh Conerly, I know it doesn't give you the immediate fix that you want, but think back to when the Ravens drafted Jonathan Ogden. The Ravens already had two good offensive tackles when they drafted Jonathan Ogden. Now Jonathan Ogden was number 1 overall pick, right? Or top 3 at least. That's a different scenario, but they took the best player available and ended up being pretty damn good for the Ravens for a long, long time. I would put it into that bucket that he might not even start immediately, but I think his upside is better than, say, taking Titus Howard in the 20s versus taking Josh Conerly Jr. in the 20s. I feel a lot better about Josh Conerly than I did at the time when they took Titus Howard, and with how Titus Howard is developed. The narrative that we can't develop linemen, is that real? Should we focus on players with good measures who are naturally gifted to play in the position? I think that when it comes to a narrative on any given NFL team, I would say in general, it's a bogus narrative unless you're talking about the same coaching staff. So you have Cole Popovich. I know he was the assistant offensive line coach last year, but there's only so much you can do as an assistant offensive line coach. You've got Cole Popovich as the offensive line coach. You've got Nick Caley as the offensive coordinator. Beyond that, there's not a real whole lot that goes into the logo on the helmet when it comes to, can this team develop offensive line talent or not? So I would say the narrative is bogus, and yet we also don't know if this group can develop guys. The other thing I would say is, when you ask, should we focus on players with good measures who are naturally gifted to play in the position? I think the Texans have some of those guys already, and you didn't get the best out of them last year because the coaching from an offensive coordinator standpoint, I think from Chris Strausser not being on the same page as Bobby Slowick, perhaps, all those things ends up getting the worst possible performance out of a lot of guys that have previously played better than they did. So I'm not, I hope I pronounced your name right. Italo, I wouldn't, if they have to draft based on a fear of not being able to develop guys, then we've got bigger fish to fry, and we're going to be in the same boat next year that we're in this year. Do you think Conerly Jr. will be there at 58? I highly, highly doubt it. If you weren't here at the beginning of the stream, I think the mock draft world is starting to catch up to how teams actually feel about this. We played Nate Tice, who talks to a lot of NFL teams, and he's the kind of blogger that NFL teams actually talk to and respect. And his father was in the NFL forever. He's got relationships there. So he had a couple of people basically say like, hey, ixnay on all this Josh Conerly talk, okay? We're trying to keep this a secret. I think a lot of teams, and the Texans perhaps included, are kind of hoping they might think of him as a guy that's in the top 15 or so, or top 20, let's say top 20, but they're hoping that he slides down. And when it comes to teams monitoring the mock drafts, that's an interesting one, because what some teams will do is they monitor the mock drafts because they know that a lot of the guys are getting information from other people. So remember, Daniel Jeremiah famously, I won't say infamously because this was a hell of a prediction, famously in his final mock draft predicted that the Texans would draft C.J. Stroud, and then they would trade up to get Will Anderson. Now, I'm guessing that Daniel got a tip from either the Cardinals or the Texans about that possible scenario right before the draft, but that's an extreme version of what goes on where, hey, Daniel Jeremiah talks to a lot of NFL teams, and then he talks about what those teams are saying to him. So I think a lot of teams do monitor exactly what guys like Daniel Jeremiah or Nate Tice or I think Mel Kiper to a certain extent, when the guys in the media who teams can trust aren't making it up when they talk about their connections or what they're hearing from teams. I think they monitor that scuttlebutt, and a lot of that scuttlebutt's starting to kind of bubble up now to where people are realizing like, all right, yeah, Josh Conerly does check off a whole lot of boxes. And that's where I think if Conerly gets drafted by the Texans, I think a lot of people are going to be upset because he's not going that high in mock drafts and what have you. I personally would be really excited about it because I think the kid's got a boatload of potential, and I really like the way he plays. Let's go back to, let's mention another thing. Look at this kid. He could be like the third string bass player in a junior high orchestra. He's got room to grow and develop. This has hurt us before, though. Kenyon Green looked a little bit immature physically, and then he came back this year looking like a relative Adonis version of his former self, and it didn't pan out. So we got to be careful when we think, hey, the guy's got room to grow and develop and get stronger. It doesn't always work out that way. That's like sometimes when you talk about, like, well, he doesn't use his hands well, but that can be coached. Okay. Has the guy not received any coaching yet in his career? Which is another positive for Josh Conerly, is that I think he shows a lot of evidence of having accepted coaching. There are a lot of things about his game that doesn't need all that much refinement. With Gray Zabal, I watch him and like, man, when he uses his hands, they're lethal. but he doesn't always use his hands properly. There's a lot of projection there. With Gray Zabel, you got to acknowledge the fact that he played at a smaller school. The only real good film you have of him versus a bunch of top-tier talent is at the Senior Bowl. But that's something that you can acknowledge that the guy played at a smaller school, but you can't also take that and turn it into a strength and say, well, right, he hasn't had all this experience, but look at how well he did at the Senior Bowl. He'll clean all that stuff up. The one thing with Conerly, I think it was Conerly. Was it Conerly that got destroyed by Mike Green on that one rep at the Senior Bowl? It was, but he was playing right tackle, and so playing out of position for him. So you look at it, but you also think, all right, it is, some guys have a much harder time moving over to the other side of the ball. So I'm not gonna weigh too heavily Gray Zabel's Senior Bowl performance. I'm not gonna knock a lot of guys who have played in the Big Ten against big schools consistently if they have a couple bad reps in the Senior Bowl. But I'd be really happy about it. Yeah, being coachable is a characteristic that Caserio and D'Amico are always talking about. Now, as far as Tyler Booker goes, the two guys, and so I saw somebody mention Ibuka at 25 and Donovan Jackson at 58. I could see Donovan Jackson falling to 58. As far as Ibuka and Tyler Booker are the two guys that are eminently swarm-worthy candidates. People talk about Tyler Booker in some of the same energy and the same way that they talked about Will Anderson at Alabama. Ibuka, people gush about his leadership, his competitiveness, his football intelligence, all of that. And that's an interesting one. I always with Matthew Golden, I try to imagine, all right, what would Matthew Golden's production have looked like if he were at Ohio State? Because he does a lot of the nuanced stuff really well. I don't think he's as fast as his 4.29 40. There was a reason that after he got that 4.29 40, he didn't run at the combine and he didn't run at his pro day. He was smart. He's like, listen, I'm not gonna run a 4.27 on the next one. So I think he just let it sit there because I don't think he's really a 4.29 40 type of speed guy. But I also think that he wasn't in as rich an environment as Ibuka. I do like Matthew Golden's competitiveness. Right now, I'm leaning more towards Golden than Ibuka, but I think Caserio likes just rock solid versus big competition, large body of work that the swarm and then the leadership traits and everything that might tip it over to Ibuka for that. Donovan Jackson. I don't like that I keep seeing that Donovan Jackson is slew-footed, duck-footed, and that's a mark against him. I will point out two athletes, both of them with connections to the state of Ohio. CJ Stroud, duck-footed, right? Ended up running pretty damn well in the second half of this season and in the playoffs this year. LeBron James, duck-footed. He'll never make it in the NBA. He's duck-footed. For interior offensive linemen especially, I kind of like a guy who's kind of duck-footed. You get in that sumo deadlift position. You've just got extreme power. You watch any world record squat and see where those guys' toes are pointed out. You can generate a lot of force. It does. Now with Donovan Jackson, there's times where his first step isn't as good as you want to be. Maybe that's because of the duck foot. I don't know. Yeah, people like Donovan Jackson. Would you want to go for 2 picks at the O-line in this draft? I would. Yeah. I would hate to draft too many defensive players this year. The one other big thing that I'm curious about is the way the mock drafts and everything else are looking. When they get to 25, there are defensive tackles that I still get excited about. There are guys that I think that guy looks like the back half of the first round. The guards, I'm just a little bit more iffy about. And I tried really hard with Tyler Booker not to be worried about his athleticism. But now when I watch him, I can't not see it. I can't not see that, man. Even when he's away from the play, even when he's kind of jogging after the play is past him and everything, he's just kind of heavy-footed. And I just don't know. I love so many things about him, but there's kind of a glaring stodginess to the way he moves. But he is a big dude. Some of it, he's a big dude, but he's also got wide hands and he lets guys into his body. which you can get away with in college. It's a lot harder to do in the NFL. You're not just going to absorb contact as much. That's what makes me nervous about him. It's not that I don't think any of those guys are bad 25th overall picks. I just see more defensive tackles with a little bit more upside there. But yeah, I would agree with the comment. I'm very eager to draft offensive linemen, a guard, a tackle, a center, however it might work out. I think there's a chance Nick might trade back too. So if you're going to the draft party, just be ready for that. I'm sold on Booker as a high second round pick. I'm not 100% sold on him. I was sold on him, and I'm not. Listen, and to be clear, we're talking about the 25th pick here. I'm not 100% sold on any of these guys. It's hard for me. I generally hate rookies. I generally hate draft picks. But I was a 4th round pick who always had a chip on my shoulder against anybody that was drafted in the 1st or 2nd round. And in training camp, I tried to destroy them as much as possible from my rookie year on upward. Especially when you get to pick number 25, all of these guys have things that might prevent them from being good in the NFL. So when you ask if I'm sold on anybody, my blanket answer is no. There's guys that I have more nervousness about than others. So with Tyler Booker, yeah, I'm a little bit nervous that some of his game won't transfer to the NFL. With Josh Conerly Jr., I'm less nervous that his game won't translate to the NFL. He does a lot of things already that look like he's ready for the NFL, where with other guys you're looking at him and you're thinking like, well, can he tie this together? I think Kelvin Banks is that way. There's a few things that I gotta see him tie it all together before I feel really, really good about him. So I feel less worse about Josh Conerly Jr. Let's see. I said this is the most overrated draft class in a long time. You know what I think part of that might be, Forever Royal, is simply in general from year to year now, because you've got so many underclassmen coming out that there's so many guys that, man, if they just had one more year, Blake Fisher last year, if Blake Fisher had just one more year in college, they would have looked more like a 1st or 2nd round draft pick. I think that there's just so many of those guys, especially at the size positions, where at offensive line, at defensive tackle, those guys with one more year of maturity, with one more year of technique, I think it feels and looks a lot different. When I watch Mason Graham, the defensive tackle, he is technically pure. And I've got reservations about him, don't get me wrong. But when it comes down to a technique standpoint, he does a lot of things that look like more defensive linemen used to look like. When guys played for 4 years, they looked more polished like that. Mason Graham does a lot of that stuff right now. And I just think you have fewer of those guys. If Josh Conerly Jr. had gone back and played one more year, I think he would have looked extremely polished. I think that it would have been a slam dunk. There's a really good chance that he'd be a consensus top 15 pick, because he got a lot better as this year went along. He'd have more film against Big Ten guys and all of that. So, for the most part, this is where I'm trying to let me do a little bit of a mental health cleanse here. I want to show you a bald eagle. Oh, where is it? Oh, never mind. I don't have it. I'll have to do it in my next stream. Bald eagle that I saw on my in-laws' property the other day. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful sight. Felt very patriotic. Damn it. Felt it was very cleansing. It was just a pure moment. And as far as the mental health side, this is what this draft talk, pre-draft. The thing that bothers me most is how damn certain people are of their opinion. Because my God, the disparity between people's confidence in their favorite draft picks versus the way GMs and personnel people actually talk about it is so vast. Like every GM, no matter how good he is, has been burned multiple times by guys that he really liked or he thought in his heart was a slam dunk that you just flat out don't know. So it's hard for me to talk about all these predictions without and sound as cocksure as I probably should as a blowhard talking head. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, send me. I gotta do. You guys ask really good questions and make a lot of good comments, especially afterwards or during the stream that I don't get to. So I'm going to try to round up some good Q&A type stuff for a laid back one tomorrow, unless we get breaking news. Like, subscribe.